Good morning, everyone. We're going to be getting started in just about 5 minutes here. Thanks for taking a little time out of your day. We want to make sure that everyone has time to join. So we will aim for an 11:30 start as scheduled. Hope everyone's having a good day. I just want to remind everyone we'll be starting in a couple of minutes. We'd like to encourage you that if you have questions now or through the course of the program, please do feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to add them in. That way I'll be able to get them moved along to our panelists. Again, that's the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll get started in just a moment. Well, hello, everyone. I see some more folks are starting to file into our Zoom room, but it is 11:30, and maybe we ought to get things rolling. A very good Tuesday to you. I hope everyone who's on this call is safe and in a place where they can stay relatively cool today. I know that's a rather tall order, but we're so glad that you could take a few minutes with us today. Before we get any further, I just want to repeat, if you have any questions for our panel now or through the course of the program, please do use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to add them into the discussion. It is 11:30 and it looks like we've got a pretty good group shaping up here. So why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is April Baer, and I host a show on Michigan radio called Stateside during the weekdays. It's also a podcast. And I'm very honored to be here leading this discussion about new Americans, refugees, and how we're welcoming them into our Michigan communities. I do want to say that Samaritas values your time and your thoughts. We will try to get to as many of folks' questions as we possibly can. If you would, please look for the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen whenever you have something that you'd like to ask the panel about. And we'll do our best to address it by the end of this presentation today. I also wanted to say we all have some bitterly earned experience with Zoom meetings, thanks to the past 2 years. If your Zoom connection is a little bit spotty, one thing you can try that I sometimes do is by calling the phone number listed in your Zoom confirmation email. If you're just auditing the meeting while you're perhaps driving or something, maybe pull over and see about that. It might be a good way to hear everything that's going on without stressing out your connection. It's a real pleasure to have you all with us today, and we do want to try to get to as much as we can of what our panelists have to say and what you have questions about. We have a really wonderful group of people here to shed some light about the work that they've been doing. So I guess I'll start with introductions. Ben Kavanaugh is with us today, Michigan State Refugee Coordinator, and also a program director in the Office of Global Michigan. As the State Refugee Coordinator, Ben's responsibility is to try to get everyone together from public and private groups for refugee resettlement and integration into the state. He has more than a decade of experience in child welfare, public assistance, and other social service programs. Ben, it's good to have you. Thank you for joining us on the meeting today.
Glad to be here.
We also are joined by Scott Preston, Special Projects Manager for Global Detroit. Lest you think that from the name of the organization that Global Detroit is just keeping everything going everywhere. That's not entirely untrue, but Scott's piece of this is to coordinate the regional collaboration of refugee service providers. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of different towns across the state where newcomers are being welcomed, and his job is to try to help create some collaboration where possible, sharing information and resources. He manages a program that improves the lives and homes of immigrant Detroiters through sustainable energy upgrades. He worked as a freelance journalist and researcher in the Middle East with a focus on the Syrian refugee crisis before he did this work. Scott Preston, welcome, and giant high five for expat from the industry.
Thanks, April. Glad to be here.
We should say also Scott's recovering from COVID, so we're going to try not to tax his voice any more than we absolutely have to today. The next person I'd like to introduce you to is Mihaela Mitrofan. She's Director of New American Programs at Samaritas. She has had some very interesting experiences in the past couple of months that she's going to share. She has been in Romania and on the border of Ukraine on a humanitarian mission. While she was there, she was working with NGOs, human service organizations, and some other kinds of congregations near the border to distribute humanitarian aid to displaced refugees. Mihaela, good to have you, and we can't wait to hear about what you saw while you were abroad.
Thank you, April. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And Fatima Mirzad is with us today. She is, oh, sorry, I just lost my tab. She has had experiences of her own as a relatively new American and relatively new Michigander. And we're looking forward to hearing more about her observations about what is most helpful as people are arriving in Michigan. Fatima, I know you have a lot to share. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get to it. Obviously, there has been so much going on within the last 6 months, the last year, so much in terms of refugees from Afghanistan who are coming to this country, and a lot of interest in a new wave of Ukrainian families coming to Michigan. Ben, I'd like to start things out with a little discussion of language, and let's just see if we can set a few basic terms. What do we mean when we talk about the differences between refugees and immigrants? People may have heard those words used kind of interchangeably when maybe they're not. I wonder if there are also other terms that you would like more people to understand better, like parolee in terms of immigrants' experiences and SIV. Can you give us a little tutorial here as we get started?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think very simply put, an immigrant is anyone coming to live here from another country, typically seeking some sort of permanent residence. A refugee is an immigrant, but technically speaking, refugee is a class or code for entering to the U.S. Specifically, a refugee is someone who's unable to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of either race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social or political group. I think with the arrival of, especially from Afghanistan, a lot of people probably heard the term SIV. An SIV is a special immigrant visa, and for purposes of this work is most commonly associated with those individuals from Iraq and Afghanistan who assisted the U.S. military or government in their country. As you mentioned, you also hear the word parolee used in immigration work. This is specifically referencing humanitarian parole. And there's various means by which one might enter under humanitarian parole. But parole allows an individual who may be otherwise ineligible for admission into the U.S. To be in the U.S. for a temporary period, usually for urgent humanitarian reasons. So historically, we've seen this often used for individuals from Cuba, for example, but more recently, the federal government has used it more widely to admit certain populations to the U.S. to ensure their rescue and safety quickly. Specifically, this was used in the evacuation of Afghanistan and now for Ukrainians. So, I mean, as administrators of federal funding and programming, we have to be cognizant of these designations and what individuals become eligible for. But really, at the end of the day, they're all fleeing similar circumstances and seeking shelter and refuge from very similar dire situations.
Ben, I suspect as we're having this conversation, there's another term that may come up. One of our participants named Elsie mentioned asylum seekers. And that is sometimes a different group. There are refugees who are asylum seekers and there are refugees who are not. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, sure. I mean, asylum seekers have to meet sort of the same standard as a refugee, having a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country. Typically, we would refer to asylum seekers in our work as those who are seeking that protection already here in the U.S., whereas a refugee is usually left their country for another country, and then the U.S. is their, third or more sort of destination of safety. So asylum seeker is seeking much of the same protection, has to meet the same standard, but is typically already at a U.S. border or within the U.S. seeking that protection.
Yeah. Mihaela, what's your experience of why these terms are important or how they can define how even someone thinks about their own experience?
Yeah, April, there is so much power in words, right? And there is an emotional connotation, right, to refugees when we refer to individuals as refugees. They can be women, they can be children, they can be elderly, special needs, children or adults. And it is so important to keep at the forefront of, our thinking that they are humans, they are individuals who are here in need of protection. As far as program eligibility and services, it is an important distinction between refugees and humanitarian parolees. So refugees typically enter in the United States with an employment authorization document, which allows them to apply for a social security card immediately and gain employment, while humanitarian parolees have to apply for a employment authorization document. In the case of Ukrainian humanitarian parolees, they need to wait several months until they receive that document, which allows them to work in the United States. For the other categories, of course, there is a process, whether you wait overseas and go through the vetting, or here in the United States, where they go through interviewing, through background checking, eye scans, biometrics, and very thorough interview to receive the benefit they apply for. One more comment, if I may, at Samaritas, we empower refugees to see themselves being a refugee just for a short time. It is a phase. However, we empower them to become new Americans, right? I mean, they preserve their identity, they preserve their morals and values, but we also encourage them to become integrated in our community through employment and being part of their school, children's school activity or at work, and also contributing to our community with their skills and gifts.
Right. Fatima, I wondered if you might have some perspective on this too. There are many languages spoken in Afghanistan, but I wonder if the ones that you consider yourself most comfortable in, what words you kind of grew up using to talk about outlanders, people who were coming into the country or who left the country to go to another place?
Thank you, April. You are correct. There are many languages spoken in Afghanistan, and the two national languages are Dari and Pashto. I speak both of these in addition to English and Urdu. So the word in Dari, the word for the refugee is Majir, and in Pashto it's Kadwal, like they call it, the refugee as that. So these words are in this, in Dari and Pashto, these words are used to describe a person who have had fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution, and had lost all their connection to a local community, has crossed an international border to find safety in another country and start a new life there. They often, like we call a refugee, those people who have often have had to flee with little more than the clothes on their backs, leaving behind homes, possessions, jobs, and loved ones.
Yeah. Are these words as full of meaning in Dari and Pashto as they are in English?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So the margin, yeah.
Fatima, do you mind sharing a little bit of your story of how you came to Michigan?
Sure. So, being a refugee, I mean, no one is willing to leave their home until it's not safe for them. We had to leave Afghanistan because our affiliation to the US institutions put our lives at risk from the Taliban. Mm-hmm. Secondly, we have many girls in our family. We want them to be educated, and that's no longer possible in Afghanistan. Our journey out of Afghanistan was very scary, and we were not sure that we were going to be allowed to leave the country at that time. We left everything and our extended family. We are so grateful now that to be here in Michigan, and we hate for the people which we have left behind. So we left Afghanistan at the end of August 2021. Then we spent around 6 weeks in a military base in Germany, followed by almost 3 months intense in a military base in New Jersey. And then we spent 2 months in a hotel in Dearborn. This was a long time for the children to be out of school and for us to not have a house to live there. So since March 2022, we have been living in a house. We are where we are cooking for ourselves. The kids taking care of our health. We are beginning to establish ourselves in Michigan. Everyone in the family who can is working. The children are in the school. The family members with the weaker English are rapidly getting stronger. We have learned to drive. We are using the library, and we are learning about how life works in Michigan. During this process of resettlement, we have been greatly supported by the friendship, love, and kindness of the people from our co-sponsor, Christchurch Cranbrook, and our resettlement agency, who have been our Samaritas, who have been our teachers, and we have been welcomed by them and by the community in Michigan.
I think that a lot of Americans who were not otherwise paying attention to these issues got a reminder when they saw some of the stories coming out of Kabul, just how high the stakes were for people. I really appreciate your pointing out that the journey doesn't just end when somebody gets on, makes it onto an airplane. There are a lot of steps to this. So thank you very much for that. Scott, if I can come over to you and tell us a little, you have this sort of 10,000-foot view of what's going on in different places. Can you share with us what is going on as people are coming, at least to the, sort of the metro area in Southeast Detroit that you work with, and how Global Detroit and the organizations that you work with are helping people get back on their feet?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, April, and thanks to Samaritas for convening the roundtable and inviting Global Detroit to join. Very happy to be here. I'll just start out by stating that immigrants and refugees are a really important part of Michigan's community and culture and economy. We have actually been the 4th largest state recipient of refugees over the last decade. And the majority of those refugees end up coming to the Southeast Michigan area, the Metro Detroit area. Between 2006 and 2016, the majority of refugees in that decade ended up in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, and Washtenaw counties. And there's good reasons why Detroit as a metro area attracts so many refugees. There's several factors that lead to that. One of the first things I'll mention is that we're a very multicultural space. We have diverse communities from all over the world. In Dearborn, for example, we have the largest community of Arabs outside the Middle East. In Hamtramck, there's a large Bangladeshi population. There are Polish people, Yemeni communities. In Detroit, we have a strong Latinx community. And with those communities come different resources and amenities that help facilitate the process for new Americans coming into the country and refugees. For example, there's a lot of religious institutions from all over the world, such as mosques. There are halal food vendors. There are grocery stores that have food that a lot of things that I've never seen before and don't even know what they are, but they enable people coming here to cook recipes for their family that their households rely on. And all these together create a sort of sense of community that, according to Global Detroit's research, is one of the biggest reasons that people come to this area. But actually, the overwhelming majority of refugees that come to Southeast Michigan don't end up in Detroit. In recent history, a lot of refugees have moved to neighborhoods outside of the city for school systems or perceptions around public safety. But that has been changing actually since 2015 with Mayor Mike Duggan's administration. Global Detroit has worked closely with his administration to launch the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, whose express mission has really been to increase refugee resettlement into the city of Detroit itself. And they've taken a number of steps to do that successfully. they've allocated funds, for example, to support housing assistance and employment assistance. The city council has an immigration task force, and the Wayne County has allocated ARPA funds, for example, to support housing assistance. So there's a lot of initiative from local administrations and the city itself to help welcome refugees here. I'll just add on to that, if I may, that there's also a pretty robust ecosystem of civil society organizations and faith-based organizations that help welcome refugees here. And as part of that, Samaritas and Ben's office had a great idea and came to Global Detroit and asked us to start a regional refugee collaborative. We launched that in September of last year. And that has really provided a forum and a framework for the 4 largest resettlement organizations in the area and other direct service providers to come together and collaborate and tackle shared challenges and find shared solutions.
Scott, can I ask a question? One of our participants, Martha, asked if people get to choose the state or the region where they're resettled. I wonder if that is something that why it is that we have seen more people going to different places, like, for example, West Michigan in recent years.
Yeah, so I believe that the state makes that determination. Ben can weigh in here and corroborate that, but refugees also do have a choice regarding where they stay. And a lot of that is driven by family ties often, or community support networks, such as those that I was talking about.
Ben, my memory is that some of this has to do with where people might be able to find help from family or elsewhere. Is that the case?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically in refugee resettlement, there's what's called both U.S. tie and non-U.S. tie cases. And so individuals often, they try to obviously place them with a U.S. tie case with a family member. But the sort of decisions around where families and individuals are going to be placed largely is handled by the national resettlement agencies, who have local affiliates like Samaritas and the other local partners. The state and the resettlement agencies do work together to sort of help define local capacity each year, and kind of look at what existing communities there are and make proposals to the federal partners. But then, yeah, it's driven both by family ties, the potentially needs of a family, if they have very specific like medical issues that maybe need to be addressed within a certain community or a certain university or something like that. And then also, through a process of coordination with those resettlement agencies around capacity and available resources.
It sounds like complex work. I want to move things over to Mihaela right now. Mihaela, can you tell us what you saw on the border when you were on the border with Ukraine? We've been through this process in Michigan of trying to help people from Afghanistan who have very specific set of needs. And we're on the cusp of seeing an influx of folks who have a very different set of needs. Can you tell us a bit about your trip and what you think is going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely, April. And if I may, I'd like to share, more like open an album and invite you to join me on the journey. It's been an absolutely life-transforming experience for me personally, but also professionally. It allowed me to get maybe the closest that a professional who does refugee resettlement in the US could experience by going overseas and witnessing some of those situations firsthand. Mm-hmm. So what we saw, of course, was a high level of need, material needs, basic needs, a lot of despair, a lot of sadness, but also glimmers of hope and resilience. You see here, just an example of what $10,000 can cover, and the picture is cut, but behind the two vans, there are two more vans that have about 10 tons of food and medical supplies and toiletries and cleaning supplies that we were able to take into Ukraine. Along the border, we saw a lot of tents set up by humanitarian organizations, the Red Cross, the UNICEF, a number of NGOs working together. Very quickly they got mobilized, and what you don't see in the middle of that image is chair of encouragement, and that really touched my heart because it was an open space for people to, those who were weary and tired, to have to take a seat and rest for a minute and get some encouragement. We also saw a large operation set up in the city of Chernăuți, which is about 50 miles from the Romanian border. And they house several families, and they serve as a distribution site for humanitarian aid. And that's where our vans were unloaded, half of them. And we helped the next day pack some supplies and help the people who are picking them up. Yes.
Mihaela, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are seeing the initial screen that you shared, but we aren't seeing the slideshow. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of people have jumped into the Q&A to note that. I'm sorry we haven't been able to quite make this work technically.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you able to see any? I mean, the next slide.
I can see the thumbnails on the side of the initial screen, but for some reason it's not changing every time you switch.
Yeah, well, I apologize. It is the technology, right? That sometimes gets in the way. Doing one more try. If not, we'll just go through the narrative. I think a host is trying to control my screen, so please go ahead. Yeah, so lots of stories, but the bottom line there is, I think.
Can I ask a question, Mihaela? Well, there we go. We're seeing a little bit more now. I think a lot of people felt that, maybe because Ukraine is this, a Central European nation, and some of the people who were leaving the country were not without resources. Maybe they thought that the need was less great. Is that what you've observed?
Not necessarily so. I mean, there is a lot of help, a lot of focus that is on Ukraine, within Ukraine, and also surrounding countries. However, the volume is so overwhelming that people need more hands. They need encouragement. They need a lot of wraparound support. And this is what we are, that was part of our mission there, but also that's what we are preparing for with the Ukrainians that will join our community here. So it looks like the slideshow is showing now. This is the Philadelphia center that I mentioned. We dropped there, unloaded there about 5 tons of supplies. And the next slide shows a very sad office decor, as I call it. Those items, the bullet shells and tank pipes and whatnot can be found quite often on the side of the road. The next slide is showing a few bags that we prepare to distribute. That site, the Philadelphia Center, serves about 400, up to 400 individuals that go there on a daily basis to get their needed supplies. It was quite an experience. And moving along, among other stories, right, the children, they are so heavily impacted, right? Their life was abruptly stopped, and they were trying to do school online. Here they are in a kindergarten that was set up fully to host refugees, and kids were trying to be kids. Some were doing school on their smartphone, and some were sharing a laptop there. Next slide, please. A young artist. I saw a lot of teenagers, and quite sad situations. They were separated from their parents. They didn't know exactly where they were. And this young female artist, she was sharing with us that painting gives her so much joy. And the room that she was in was filled with her work that was, inspiring others as well. I know that the next slide is showing a very powerful moment that's in a room next door where we visited with 6 elderly women. And that touched me so much because I was just thinking, you reach a certain age when you want to enjoy your life's earning, your hard work, and your family, maybe children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And, these women found themselves together by chance. They hopped on a bus and they were able to make the trip to a small village in close to Chernowitz in Ukraine. And one of them was showing that, where her house was, there was a big hole in the ground from a bomb that hit that area. I think this picture is so rich in meaning that those ladies, after a long life, they found safety and peace in a place that welcomed them very warmly. But they had to put together some makeshift beds, right, with cardboard paper and some mattresses. But you could see them in the previous picture. They were just smiling and trying to show to express their gratitude and hope for peace and quiet. We have a couple more among stories. Of course, I mentioned children, but this group is especially dear to me and the team that I travel with, because they were, many of them, special needs children that travel from a city close to Kiev. The authorities there requested organization in Romania to help them relocate to Romania to seek medical care. So they travel after a long journey, avoiding blocked roads and whatnot, and they made it there. So they were very joyfully trying to, run around and get their energy a bit. We, as the picture shows here, we got them some comfort toys for the trip to Romania. The next slide is one of my favorite, because I think there is so much depth there, so much meaning in, girls like little Anastasia that traveled a long journey after she lived in a basement for several weeks, hearing sirens and bombings. And she and her mom with her friends were able to get on that green bus, and they were on a road to safety. So after the long journey, she found sleep in a small village in Romania. It is a church that hosted about 3,500 refugees. They serve as a transit site. So sometimes they sleep for a night or two. Imagine all the sheets that need to be washed, the meals that need to be prepared, and the welcome and the many stories they hear. So as far as the needs, how the needs of Ukrainian refugees differ from others, maybe a comparison between humanitarian parolees from Ukraine and humanitarian parolees from Afghanistan. The way the US government set up the program is that Ukrainians are able to join here family members in the United States through a private sponsorship, which means that the financial burden falls on their US sponsors. So there is no professional resettlement services available to them because of that reason. So while Afghans were able to benefit of an immediate set of services that were available to them. So as a service organization, Samaritas, along with the other resettlement organizations and Ben's office, right, the Office of Global Michigan, we are working work closely together in identifying what funding is available and what those first steps are in helping them integrate in our community. So programs like, go ahead.
Just to say, there are so many needs, but there's a question I had for you and really the rest of the panel too. There are some needs that are very specific to people's experience when they come. But the one thing that I've been hearing about again and again, in fact, we just did an interview that's going to broadcast on my show today with someone from Jewish Family Services talking about housing. Once people do arrive here, Mihaela, if you had to put housing at in a list of most difficult problems right now as people arrive in Michigan, how would you classify it? Would you put it closer to the top or the middle?
Yeah, I have to say it is very close to the top.
Yeah. May I ask, Ben, is there anything that you can tell us on the, I mean, obviously things are different in different communities, but even in West Michigan, lease rates are so high right now. What's being done to try to provide housing for folks?
Yeah, I mean, so the resettlement agencies historically have had some really strong partnerships through landlords and different property owners and developers. And we're trying to, look now, given how things have changed, working really closely with the state housing authority, working with federal partners to raise awareness around the challenge here. And this is not a refugee or immigrant specific problem. And so we're really trying to work with local municipalities to make sure that, the need and potential solutions and identification of creative ways to address this, that we're at the table and that we're talking with them in conjunction with conversations that are going on anyways for a lot of other populations that may be marginalized or facing similar barriers. And so it's definitely a challenge right now. It's a conversation we're having around capacity, both at the local level as well as with federal partners, and just continuing to work with, those local municipalities, with local housing authorities and with the state housing authority to try and come up with solutions both in the immediate, but also that we can address long-term in a much more holistic and intentional way. And as Scott mentioned, some of those local municipalities are stepping up in a big way. Wayne County has, provided a lot of funding. City of Detroit has been doing a lot of work in identifying and securing housing. And then we're trying to, replicate that and look at new communities that, have land bank opportunities and cities that are looking to solve some of their challenges and be welcoming cities to help address some of their own problems, while also be welcoming of newcomers like refugees.
Scott, Preston, you again have a very broad view of these. Is there anything you've heard of that's being developed to address this very specific challenge?
Yeah, sure. Well, so one of the advantages of having the collaborative is that we can tackle challenges that might be too big for an individual caseworker and organization to tackle, or might be beyond the mandate of a lot of social service organizations. And early on, our members identified as housing as one of the biggest needs. And so we have a housing work group, and my colleague Emma Davis has been putting in a lot of work to convene a landlord webinar. And the idea there is landlords are often quite reticent to rent to refugees because they might not have a credit score or rental history and things like that. And the idea is to bring landlords to the table and teach them about the challenges refugees face, how resettlement and placement works, and their role in the process, and encourage them to rent to refugees. So that's one of the big things that we're working on now. And that's coming up on June 29th.
Yeah. One of the things that occurs to me is that many of the people who are coming to the United States as new Americans may be accustomed to, or because of the way that they had to leave, they may need a multi-generational housing situation. Is that, Fatima, I don't know what situation your family was in, but do you know if it's very common for people to be able to find that if they do need it?
as the experience, so getting a house in here, it's a challenge. I mean, it's very challenging for the refugees. The reason is like not having a credit history, being a new American, and the landlord. It's, I think at some point they're in a well position, like, because no one can trust that they are giving their house to a people they don't know and they are new here. It's a challenge, but most of the resettlement agencies, they are on the top of that, and we have been able to provide house for all these people who have been to Michigan and all this Afghani client. So it's the challenge is that not having a good credit history and trusting. So and also there is very like limitation on finding a house based on the preference of the refugees, that they have a specific, like some sort of like specific area that they want to have it, but they cannot have it. And another reason is like so most of the Afghani refugee, I can say that they are a big household, like, and also that most of Afghani, like a family, we call it. It's like so they are living, all they want to live together, like their kids. They are, even if they are above 18 or above 21, and sometimes they want to live with their, daughter-in-law. So that's a challenge, like big families. So it's a challenge to not have the houses, and it's totally different compared to the culture, like the way of when we are having a house for an American, that they are a very small family and they are not like they're not living together with the extended family. So this
Absolutely. It's so hard. I mean, large families who have lived in the United States their whole lives have trouble finding affordable housing right now. This must be a terrible challenge for families coming over. What are some of the other challenges that come to your mind, panel, as you think about the experiences, the barriers that new refugees are facing? I feel like just paperwork processing took such a hit during the pandemic, as many of our public offices came grinding to a halt, or at least stopped doing things in exactly the same way. Anybody have some experience with that they'd share?
Well, I can offer a perspective on that. It's some of the experience which I had during this process. So one of the barrier could be like not being able to speak English.
Yeah.
Like it's a huge barrier to most of the refugees. It is hard to get a job if you don't speak English. It's hard to get in touch with the community where you are living. It's hard to get, communicate or know the neighborhood. So like that's one of the barrier. Another barrier is like another significant barrier when people flee their country, they often do not have the identity documentation that is expected in the US. We found that the absence of required ID, a credit history, and a permanent address made it very difficult to get resettled, to get a driver license, to open a bank account, to get a job, even to get a phone, and to find a permanent place to live. So these are the very critical and very is a basic need, requirement for starting a new life in US. So most of the refugees, when they are coming from other countries, they are fleeing from the countries where there are war, conflict, persecution. So they are not mindful about that. And some of, like in our cases, they don't have time to think about completing all the documentation, because like all the Afghani refugees, like I can say from our family experience, we have made this decision within one night of getting out of the country, because then you don't want to miss the chance, because you are putting yourself in a risk, and if you go for the offices and collect that paperwork. So it's a challenge, it's a barrier actually, and that's for all the Afghan refugees which we have been faced, because they are not coming through the airport, they are not coming through a process, they are just like a parolee, and they have been to bases, because the lack of documentation, which is totally different compared to the countries we come from and the country where we are living now, US. So they have higher standard, and that's a challenge of all the paperwork.
We had a question from a participant, Trini, who is a medical doctor in Michigan, and wondered what assistance is provided for medical health issues and for mental health issues. These are both two really big areas. Mihaela, is there anything that you can tell us about this?
Yes, it is. I want to say, as doing this work for many years, it's been quite impressive to see how the medical community, the dental care community, mental health care community have all rallied around the resettlement agencies and the state refugee health coordinator to get well organized to meet the needs of the Afghans that were resettled in our area in a very short amount of time. So there is a very clear process for referrals of Afghans and other refugees to an initial health screening. There is an organization named ACC that is contracted by the Office of Global Michigan. They have the infrastructure set up. They hired quite quickly interpreters and translators. And also creatively, they are able to meet the transportation needs of the new arrivals. So we are very grateful that our case managers are not pulled into, becoming drivers, and we see that direct support. As far as specialized services, of course, ACC conducts referrals, but also once the refugees get signed up for Medicaid and they come in the care of a family doctor, there is a referral process through screenings and assessments for further services as needed. Mental health is an obvious need, and Samaritas has developed different partnerships with external partners, but also internally. We have a very robust substance use disorder program and a growing behavioral health program. So we are at the point where those services are integrated through the very initial assessment and referral. So lots of work ahead of us, but I think we are in a good place to welcome Ukrainians as well.
Listening to all of you talk about these challenges, I'm really struck by people face the problem of getting here and getting settled once they're here. And then once they're a bit settled, they're facing all of the same challenges in terms of housing and health care that everyone in America faces. This is a lot, really. It may be a little overwhelming for folks who are joining us on the chat. I wonder if we could turn the conversation as we start to come toward the end of our time to what one person can do. Is there a role that the average person can play? One single person cannot go out and build many housing units or necessarily provide healthcare, but is there something that people should think about doing to take a more active role in the crisis? Is there anyone who has a thought to start us off on that?
I can start. So I would say two things. First, I would just encourage people to educate yourself and others. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misconception, I think, about refugee resettlement and the U.S.'s role in welcoming newcomers. April, you mentioned specifically people getting exposed to the conditions and people fleeing during the fall of Kabul. World challenges and people needing to seek safety is an ongoing reality from every corner of the globe. So I would just encourage people to continue to make themselves aware and informed. And our office is happy to help connect people and point to resources for that. And then also people can volunteer, donate goods. You mentioned, people may not be able to build or donate houses, but we've seen it happen also. And so, both our resettlement agencies like Samaritas and others, as well as, a number of our service providers are always looking for volunteers to help with various needs and in that welcoming work.
I know someone who has been working with folks from Afghanistan, and there are regular emails saying, okay, things for small children, diapers, blankets, very specific household items. It seems like all you have to do is get connected with someone who does the work, and you'll be you'll be kept in the know. Does anyone else have ideas about important things that one single person can accomplish?
Well, I'll just reiterate Ben's point. He put it really well. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that people can do to help refugees. There's a huge level of need, lots of volunteering opportunities for everything from transportation to education with children, cultural orientation. And if people have capacity, they could, for example, sponsor a Ukrainian family to come or foster an unaccompanied refugee minor, which are children that end up in the United States as refugees without parental support. And a lot of time, even just the journey to the United States can be very traumatic. So there's a lot of ways that people can get involved. I think Mihaela will be really well positioned to speak to that, being close to the work. But, like Ben was saying, so many of the challenges that face refugees in this day and age are really political. And so just educating yourself about the challenges that refugees face, the contributions that they make to our community, the economic contributions that they make can be really powerful in dispelling misinformation when you encounter it.
Someone, Elsie in the chat recommends also finding or forming a support group to help just one family. Mihaela, that's a thing that people can do?
Yes, it is. It's a beautiful thing to do. Samaritas runs a co-sponsorship program where we partner with various groups, whether within a congregation or a business, sometimes a university, we screen them as volunteers, and we learn what their areas of expertise and interest and passion is. And we match them with a family. Those opportunities are extremely powerful. They are very rewarding for everyone involved. Typically we offer those co-sponsorships for a time frame somewhere between 3 and 6 months. There is a financial commitment that the group is making, but it is totally voluntary. We have groups that are simply contributing with volunteering, driving, being friends of refugees. The cultural mentorship is a significant piece of the initial work that is needed. We also promote work with the youth. We want to make sure that children and teenagers are not overlooked in this complex process of refugee resettlement. So all those opportunities are posted online. Please visit us and get connected. We would welcome you and love to partner with you.
Sure. This is kind of random, but my daughter recently discovered a game online called GeoGuessr. It uses Google Earth, and as you play it, you're dropped down into various places around the world. It could be anywhere. It could be the middle of a large city. It could be a forest or a mountain or a seashore or farmlands, and you have to figure out where you are just by using limited visual cues. And I was talking to my daughter about this as we were playing and thinking about what it means to suddenly navigate in a place where, again, the language skills, maybe you can get clues from what's going on around you, maybe you can't. I think also, this is just my very small piece of this, but talking to our children about this and helping them to understand the perspective of others seems like an important piece as we all develop an empathetic approach to this. Just a quick follow-up from Trini, who's joining us today, who asked the question about medical services, says, thank you. We also got some information from MDHHS on preparations, but we'll need more information on logistics, such as clinics that can see them. Thank you. Is there anything that we haven't discussed in terms of immediate challenges? There are so many folks who have come from Central America or South America over the past 10 years. There's this influx of families who have come from Afghanistan within the past year. And now, people, we're on the verge of welcoming people from Ukraine. It just strikes me that these are, so many different people come from so many different places around the world. Mihaela, how do you try to offer something to all of them, who are coming with such different experiences?
Well, I always say that it takes a village to welcome refugees and serve them in the best way possible. We cannot do this work alone. Probably it's no surprise to our audience here that the refugee resettlement programs are quite underfunded. Federal government is trying to keep up. However, the work is quite complex. We are talking about serving very vulnerable populations. I mean, you have the whole package, right? And I say it with deep sensitivity, right? We are dealing with homelessness, language illiteracy, right? Or lack of language, sometimes even lack of education for some, large families, single mothers, medical, mental health needs. So it's all together. And what we do at Samaritas, we are as proactive as we can, right? We are in constant conversations with our federal partner agencies, with Samaritas National Partner Agency, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. We consult with Ben and his team at the Office of Global Michigan. We are part of the Refugee Resettlement Collaborative that Scott is leading. So it is a very collaborative effort, but so the work is not done in silos. We also consult with local government, with different cities, municipalities, just to make sure we place refugees in areas that are welcoming and there are resources. We also hire as much as possible bilingual staff and bicultural staff. So there is that sense of welcome and familiarity with the culture. And we constantly fine-tune the work we do. There is never a plateau. The work needs to happen quicker and more comprehensive, because we want, as I mentioned, being a refugee is just that initial phase. It's the journey, the experience that these individuals have. But what's ahead of them depends on us in so many ways, right? Giving them hope and painting the picture that there is employment, there is safety, there is a good school, good education for their children. So it is a second chance at life that we are giving through this wonderful mission.
Yeah. This is a journey that people come to America for, from Syria, from Central America, from all these places. Fatima, you became part of this group of people. Is there a way to say what was most helpful to you when you first arrived, or what you learned from going through this?
So I would say, like, if you are coming to a new environment, like leaving everything behind, if you are welcomed on that place, that is meaning a lot. The hospitality, and if you found the good people around you, which will make you to feel safe, and which will make you to like welcome. That's what we found, and we are blessed to have that opportunity to start a new life, a life which we are not worried that what will happen in next minute. So sometimes I'm saying to some of friends that, like, when they are making plan in US, like when people they are making plan for 1 year ahead. We were not in our country, we were not able to make plan for 1 day, because we were not sure what's going on, what will be happening next. So we when we arrived here, everyone was talking about like 2023, 2024, and I was saying that how, because it's security, that's why they really, like, without any stop, they were saying that, oh, my plan is for the 2023, this is my plan. And I was saying that we were not able to plan for the next day, because even we were not sure that we are going to be able to go to office, we are going to be able to see off our kids and come like back at home, or we were going to be able to see them. So now this is a blessing that we are safe. My family is safe. I mean, we are living in a place where there is all the neighbors are good. They are they were hospitable, and but we feel the pain. I feel the pain that for my family, which I left behind, and I feel the pain for all the girls and women of my country who have left behind. So there is a poem from our and the friendship we got in here in Michigan. So there is a poem from one of the from Afghan, like it's a century back. So I would like to read that. So it says that human beings are member of a whole and creation of one essence and soul. If a member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. It shows that if you have a body, if you have pain in a hand, I'm sure that all the body will feel that. So all the human beings are the same, and we were happy to have that that hospitality. I mean, we have been to we are blessed, and we were lucky to found all this friendship, all this love, all this respect from our neighbors and from all our sponsor agency and all the people we have met here, and we were welcomed here. So
Fatima, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about what it was like. And that poem is amazing. Thank you for that as well. Let us all take a minute to say thank you to our panelists, Fatima Mirzad, also Mihaela Mitrofan of Samaritas, Ben Kavanaugh with the state, and Scott Preston from Global Detroit. Hey, there's those emojis. Another thing we learned how to do during the pandemic, right? We so appreciate all of you spending some time. That is the big commodity right now. Yes. There is going to be more information about the Michigan Refugee Network emailed to you later, but you can also check out the Samaritas website if you have questions about some of the things we've been talking about here. It's samaritas.org/Michigan Refugee Network. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And I'm sure that all of you found this as informative and in some ways restoring as I did. Please have a good rest of the day and share the good word, please. Bye-bye.